They built the highways that cross this continent, the cities where you walk, the companies where you work, and the security system that sustains your comfort today. But today, the baby boomer generation is often reduced to an internet meme. They are called out of touch, accused of being disconnected from the present, and labeled simply as the generation of rigidity and no. But what if I told you that behind that thick skin and that often stern gaze, there is a soul shaped by scars you were never taught to see? There is a deep emotional silence that was the price they paid so that you could have the privilege of having a voice today. There is an unprocessed pain that holds up your freedom. Stay with me until the end, because today we aren't just talking about history, we are opening the doors to an emotional archive that the modern world insists on ignoring. I guarantee you, after this video, you will never look at your parents, your grandparents, or that lonely neighbor the same way again. Born between 1946 and 1964, they were the result of the greatest optimism humanity had ever seen, the end of World War II. They were the post-war babies. They grew up in an America that smelled like fresh asphalt, mowed grass, and apple pie. They saw the rise of Levitt towns, those perfect suburbs with identical houses and white picket fences. But that perfection came with an invisible price. They grew up under the bright promise of the American dream, but also under the terrifying shadow of the nuclear mushroom cloud. While you today might fear cancel culture on social media, they were doing duck and cover drills in elementary school, hiding under wooden desks to the sound of blaring sirens. While you have the world in the palm of your hand, they had the garden hose in the backyard, the radio as their only window to the world, and a real, pulsating fear that a war could end everything before dinner. They learned early on that life wasn't about finding yourself or seeking a mystical purpose. It was about stability. To a boomer, the world was a place where things could vanish in the blink of an eye, just as their parents had described during the Great Depression. That's why they clung to what was solid: brick, steel, property, and a job for life. Now, let's talk about the 4 super strengths of the boomer soul. 1. Silent resilience, the pride of standing tall. The first great strength of the boomer generation is the ability to keep going even when the heart is in pieces. They didn't know the concept of a mental health day. They learned to get up the next morning even when life weighed a ton. If a boomer had the flu, they went to work. If they were sad, they cleaned the garage. They don't stop the world because of pain. They make the world turn despite the pain. This made them people who endure far more than they show, who rarely ask for help, and who prefer to solve everything alone, in the silence of their own soul, so as not to be a burden to anyone. 2. A deep sense of responsibility, the value of sweat. They grew up believing a man's word was his only real currency. In the America of that era, a handshake was worth more than a 100-page contract. To them, a commitment is never broken. Work is a sacred duty, and providing for the family is the ultimate proof of character. This sense of responsibility turned many of them into heavy pillars, holding the roof over their children's heads for decades without ever asking for a thank you. They didn't work for pleasure, they worked out of duty, and there is a tragic beauty in that surrender. 3. Loyalty to structure, the fear of scarcity. The third strength is an unwavering loyalty to institutions. They grew up in a world where stability was the only remedy for panic. That's why you see a boomer staying 40 years at the same Ford plant in Detroit or the same insurance firm in Connecticut, even if they hated what they did. To them, changing jobs was a risk to the family's security. Often, what younger generations call stubbornness or lack of creativity is actually a scar from the fear of scarcity. They aren't against your new digital business, they just lose sleep thinking, what if it fails? How will you feed your children? Their protection often manifests through fear. 4. Sensitivity to unspoken signals, authority through the gaze. Many boomers grew up in homes where their fathers were war veterans, men who saw the unspeakable in Europe or the Pacific and returned unable to talk about love. In those days, authority didn't need shouting. It was shown through a look. Do you remember the scene? An American kid coming home from a baseball game after breaking a window, walking into the kitchen where their father sat reading the newspaper. The father would slowly lower the paper and just fix his gaze over his glasses. There was no speech, no immediate lecture, but in that heavy silence, the child understood everything: limits, consequences, and the disappointment of the one who sustains the home. This taught boomers to read the room, to sense the boss's mood just by the sound of footsteps in the hallway, and to anticipate disasters before they happened. Let's dive into what almost no one has the courage to say. Many boomers watched their fathers kill themselves working double shifts in steel mills or coal mines. They grew up hearing that complaining was a lack of gratitude toward those who gave their lives on the front lines. Think of your father or grandfather. How many of them had a gift for music but tucked the guitar away in the attic to study accounting because it paid the bills? How many of them wanted to travel the world but spent their entire lives commuting between home and the factory so you could have name-brand shoes or a college education? They traded their own identity for your security. They were the generation that accepted being just a number in the system so that you could have the freedom to be whoever you want. Their silence was the concrete that paved your path. Imagine a man who leaves home at 5 a.m. and returns at 7 p.m., too tired to play, being seen by his children as absent or cold. But in his mind, every hour of overtime was a kiss on his children's foreheads. He didn't know how to say, "I love you," so he said, "I paid the bills." Boomer love is a love materialized in provision. To understand why this behavior causes so much friction today, we need to look at the facts. Why does your boomer boss get so bothered when you ask to work from home or focus on work-life balance? To him, work is life. He saw friends laid off in droves during the recessions of the 70s and 80s. He saw entire industrial towns die. When he demands blood, sweat, and tears, he's trying to teach you the armor that protected him. He doesn't understand that the world has changed because his fear is still analog. When a millennial or Gen Z talks about depression or burnout, a boomer often reacts with disdain. "In my day, we didn't have those things." This isn't a lack of empathy, it's a defense mechanism. If he admits your pain is real, he has to admit the pains he swallowed his whole life were also real, and that would make his world collapse. It's easier to call you weak than to admit he was wounded for decades in silence. The obsession with maintenance. Do you know why your boomer dad spends all Saturday pressure washing the driveway or mowing the lawn with surgical precision? Or why he insists on changing your car's oil himself? In his mind, taking care of what he owns is the only way to show he has control over his life. It's his way of saying, "I take care of what is ours." The greatest strength of the boomer generation is, in the end, their ghost resilience. They are the pillars that don't appear in the party photos but ensure the roof doesn't fall on the guests. They carried the weight of a world that changed too fast. They were born with typewriters and are passing away with artificial intelligence. They saw man reach the moon and now see the world divided into smartphone screens. And in the middle of it all, they are still there, waking up early, taking care of the house, maintaining traditions, being the anchor in a sea that never stops churning. Perhaps you grew up with a void of verbal affection, but I invite you today to look at the hands of that boomer in your life. Look at the wrinkles, the calluses, the tiredness in their eyes. Their love wasn't written in poetry cards. It was written in paid rent receipts. It was written in the dinner that never was missing. It was written in the security of knowing that if everything went wrong in your world, their house would still be there, with the grass cut and the door open. When we look at the boomer generation, we aren't looking at people who are outdated.
We're looking at survivors who sacrificed their subjectivity to build our objectivity. They were strong so that we could be sensitive. They were rigid so that we could be flexible. Understanding this context isn't just a history exercise, it's an act of spiritual charity. When you stop fighting their toughness and start seeing the sacrifice that created that toughness, healing happens. Anger turns into compassion, judgment turns into gratitude. If you still have a boomer in your life, be it your father, your mother, a grandparent, or a mentor, honor their story. Not because they are perfect, but because they endured the weight of a time that demanded the heart be made of stone so the family wouldn't be made of glass. The question I leave you with today is, what would you say to that child of the 50s who had to grow up too fast to sustain the world you inherited? Tell me in the comments, what is the invisible sacrifice you can now see in your family's history? If you are from the boomer generation, please accept our respect. We see your effort, we see your silence, and we thank you for every foundation you built. If this video brought clarity to your soul, share it. Send it to that relative you have a hard time talking to. Sometimes the words we can't say are spoken through a shared story. May peace, understanding, and honor visit your home today and always. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.